The kid video we watched reminded us that the waiting is hard. Remember having our kids waiting for Grandma and Grandpa to show up, just plastered up against the window for hours, just waiting for them to come until we could find something to give them something to do to help that path. So it wasn't just time doing nothing, but time doing something productive. The other image I love in waiting in the season of Advent is the image, the season of pregnancy, this time of waiting and preparing. Yesterday we were at our daughters, they're in the midst of pregnancy, waiting, and we were trying to get a room ready to move one kid down so that we can put a new one up in the nursery. There's lots of work to be done. It's not just waiting and the kid shows up, then let's get ready for a baby. We got 9 months to get ready, and so we're busy doing that. I like to think of Advent as sort of a 4-week pregnancy. Wouldn't that be nice, a 4-week pregnancy? Woohoo! 4-week pregnancy, waiting for the birth of Jesus. Time for us to wrap our minds around something that's going to change our lives forever. All right. We're going to talk about Ezekiel today. We've been looking at prophets. We started with Elijah, then we talked about Amos, and we talked about Isaiah. Last week we talked about Daniel and his friends. Today we're going to talk about the prophet Ezekiel. Now Ezekiel was sort of like Daniel. He was one of those brightest and best who lived in Judah, and when the Babylonians came and they came and destroyed Babylon. They took many of the people. He was part of the first wave of exiles that were taken from Judah to back to Babylon. He was in training to be a priest, but there was no temple in Babylon. So what are you going to do? God calls him then, switches professions from being a priest to being a prophet, and gives him powerful visions to help make sense out of life in exile. What does it mean when we have lost everything? Who are we anymore? And now the book, as Ezekiel starts, his visions are, first of all, they talk about the reality they're living in, God's judgment upon them. Help them understand, how did we get into this place? What did we do? And Ezekiel is very clear of this is God's judgment on their faithlessness. And so they just a second. I was pulling on my ear here. There we go. Much better. But he ends the book with hope. Starts with judgment, ends with hope. Promise of peace and restoration and new life. Now the book starts with a really, really bizarre vision, all right? He's sitting there, he's in Babylon, sitting by the river, and all of a sudden he sees this huge contraption come out of heaven. It has these flying creatures with wings all over and all kinds of faces, and there's this being that sort of glows in the midst of it, and these wheels that are turning all over, and it moves, and it's moving all around. And what Ezekiel comes to realize is this is the glory of God, right? This is the awesomeness of God. So the seraphim and God on the throne, this normally was reserved for the temple. This is in the Holy of Holies. This is where you would encounter God. You expect God to be. People journey from all over the world, come to Jerusalem because that's where God was. But the vision now that Ezekiel has is this is a mobile unit. It's a chariot now. Instead of being stationary, sitting in the temple back in Jerusalem, God has come to where the people are. The glory of God in all his fullness has traveled and now is with them in Babylon. That makes a difference. It's a whole new chapter, how they think about life. So he has another vision. What I want to talk about today comes later in the book, part of the hope section. And this is another strange, bizarre vision. This one begins on an ancient battlefield where all that is left of the great armies that once fought there is piles of dry bones. This is from Ezekiel chapter 37. It says, "The hand of the Lord came upon me and brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me down in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. He led me all around them, and there were very many lying in the valley, and they were all very dry. He said to me, 'Mortal, can these bones live?' I answered, 'Lord, you know.' He said to me, 'Prophesy to these bones. Say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live.' I'll lay sinews on you. I'll cause flesh to come upon you. I'll cover you with skin. I'll put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I had been commanded. And as I prophesied, there was a noise, there was a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to its bone. And I looked, and there were sinews on them, and flesh had come upon them, and skin had covered them, but there was no breath in them. Basically, what you have is a zombie apocalypse, all right? You've got all these dead bodies that have risen up and have no life in them. A terrifying nightmare if that was the end of the vision that he has. But the story's not over, right? This is not just about resuscitating a bunch of corpses. This was about new life. We're going to be hearing about breath here in a minute, and we've already heard a little bit, and we're going to hear more about this. This word breath in Hebrew, this is a word, the same word that for wind, the same word for spirit. And it goes back, even back in Genesis in creation. It says when God takes this lifeless clay, what does God do? He breathes his spirit into it, and it becomes a living being. He said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, mortal, and say to the breath, thus says the Lord God, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain that they may live. And I prophesied as he commanded me. And breath came into them, and they lived, and they stood on their feet, a vast multitude. And he said to me, mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say our bones are dried up, our hope is lost, we are cut off completely. Therefore prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, I'm going to open your graves. I'm going to bring you up from your graves. And, O my people, I will bring you back to the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you out. I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you on your own soil, and you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will act, says the Lord. The people in exile had given up hope, right? They thought, we're far off in Babylon. God is back in the temple in Jerusalem, and that's been destroyed. What happened? Is there even God anymore? We are here far beyond God's reach. They thought they were dead. They thought there was no future. But Isaiah says, no, God is with you, right? Through this vision, assures them that God, there's nothing impossible for God, that nothing can separate them from God's love, not even death. One of my favorite movies, I say that a lot because I have a lot of movies that I like, right? But perhaps the best movie ever made is called Princess Bride, right? Some of you know Princess Bride? All right, great movie, all right, Princess Bride. And one of my favorite scenes from Princess Bride is where Billy Crystal plays a guy named Miracle Max. And the hero of the story is Wesley, and he has been killed, they think. He's been tortured to death. And so they bring him to Miracle Max and say, can you bring him back to life? And so he gives him, looks him over really well, and he says, he's not dead. He's just mostly dead. Says, when you're dead, there's nothing you can do except look for loose change, right? But it says, if you're only mostly dead, that means you are slightly alive, right? And you got something to work with. And so he takes the big bellows out and he puts it in Wesley's mouth and pumps him up full of air, and brings him back to life. All right. Now, in the vision of Ezekiel here, the people are not just mostly dead; they are completely dead. They've looked for the change. It's all gone. All right. They are just a bunch of dead, dry bones. This is not resuscitating someone who was almost dead. This is about a resurrection. Someone who was completely dead, finding new life. So where do we come in this story? I mean, where have we lost hope? Where have we given up? We've all had losses. And that's part of life. We don't get through life without having losses. It may be relationships, or maybe our hopes or dreams, but at some point we realize there's no going back to how it once was. Something has died. That part of whatever our life was is gone. But a resurrection is not about trying to go back to how things used to be. It's not about the past. A resurrection is about moving forward. It's about new life. And whether this happens on a on a personal level or community or national or global scale, the gospel, the good news, is that new life is possible. And that changes everything. And that's what Jesus was all about. I've got a story, if I can get to the video here. It's about a story about life coming out of death. A story about hope being found when all hope had been lost. Now, the story is set in Malawi. And it was interviewing a family. It was about, I think it was about 2006. Let me see if I can get caught up to wherever we were there. And you'll hear the story of, as they begin, they talk about their experience and how they found new life.
I'm Charles Msoya, the project officer for DOA project. And where we'll be going now, we'll be seeing some of the beneficiaries of ELCA World Hunger. Intervention of ELDS has changed the life of the community here.
Tunena kuti mmene inakwera gungwe yatiphunzitsa zambiri chifukwa akakhetsa ulimizi tazidziwa kuchokera mvenjeyo.
Where we started in this village, was a communal chorus. They were given 10 goats for the start. And we also started with a pig chorus. After reproducing, they started passing on.
Imango kedamo, kuchiramo mati tukatuka, kuchiramo ganga, kuchiramo mati. Chakujajo kuli mvumba, alezo salala. Kulawola mbuzi, babula apa, imango rengazi, kukatijesela momweko. Omalero lino, ima zibasula, obeze balike minda bafuku. Ye usamala wake, ima usamala wake. Bamene masuku ya kumbuyo basiri dazi ukhala pamodzi kukhanga lidiliko ayi. Koma bano lili osangalala kwambiri. Kufuka kukholako kukakhala ndobe yake ija imakatandizidwa nayo kumunda.
Anatilokosolera mmene mbewu tingalimire ni mmene tingabyalire ni mmene tingakololere.
First time we started with 30 members. As of now, 148 households have already benefited.
Zikazeshwana kumba zimezi zitatendezera vana makomo kuphunzitsa vana kusukulu ndiponso ndiwo ndefe limasangalala nzwere zinezi.
They say those working in the lands, here is really works. Just because from the donation which he was given dead, they should stand on their own.
lusakala nawo pamodzi pachakudya ndipo pamoyo umene tili nawo lusakala nawo pamodzi
awulewera busirisiri tufika napagala bana iwoni yatu njobera batukulu uli mwina ngalira uralu lusungira masiku butsogolo izakhala pendituni mono tufuba bana lusamala nditu bwino munga amene kubakalira koma bana nifomawo lose zili moyo mkulu watasi
A little later, we're going to have a chance if you want to buy a pig or a goat. Marcia's selling them out in the narthex. Not the actual pig and goat, but you make the gift, and we buy pig and goats locally out there and give them to the families to be able to do that. We call it alternative gift fair. And so hopefully you will stop and do that as well. Let's get our band back up. The song is called You Never Let Go. Talks about, so even when it's nothing but dry bones, doesn't mean that there is no hope. Actually, let's rise as we sing together. Powerful song of God's promise to be there, life in the midst of death.